and welcome back. Is that too loud or loud enough, or is that good? Okay. I hope you've had a good day and you worked with the hindrances and been mindful and reaped the benefits of mindfulness practice. So tonight I'm going to talk about that other aspect of meditation that I've spoken about a few times thus far, and it is it's the aspect of serenity. And last night I talked about insight and how insight and serenity are like twins of the one stick. They work together. They work in a way that balances each other. It protects each other, actually. So in Pali, insight's called vipassana, and the serenity aspect is called samatha. In Pali, I think in Sanskrit it's called shamatha, or maybe it's just a different way of pronouncing samatha. Sam means with. A means towards, and da means to place, to put. So what we get is this sense of drawing in and gathering and placing attention. Samatha. Good word, I guess. It's the same word that you find the word samadhi coming from. Anybody? Probably some people have heard of samadhi. I think samadhi is now in the English dictionary, as is dhamma. I think samadhi is in. Anyway, samadhi means concentration, basically. Actually, samadhi has a couple of meanings. It means it's concentration. It's this gathering in of attention that's placed in one spot. It is the last factor on the Eightfold Path, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right mindfulness, right samadhi, samma samadhi it's called. And it's also described as a practice. In Thailand, when we talked about meditation, it would be tam bhavana. I'm just about to do bhavana. I'm going to make bhavana. So bhavana is to cultivate, as I remember I spoke about. Another word for meditation in Thailand was kamatan, meaning to work. It's like work, the work of kama. And the other two terms for meditation was tam vipassana and tam samadhi. Make samadhi, literally, make concentration. So concentration is a key factor in the Eightfold Path, and it's also a key factor in meditation. And I think in the West, the way the modern contemporary third wave movement of mindfulness-based approaches, sometimes there's no real consensus about what the word mindfulness means, and you get a large variety of definitions. Sometimes it's mixed up with meaning concentration. Sometimes you hear that. Whereas in Buddhist parlance, it is definitely, they can be distinguished. Mindfulness is remembering to be attentive with care and discernment to immediate experience, just remembering to be attentive. Remember sati, that term of remembering. Samadhi, however, is this gathering of attention, it's focusing attention. So they don't exist without each other, they're connected to each other, but they can be distinguished, they can be differentiated. There's a different quality about them. There's other terms for serenity meditation or samatha. Often you'll hear calm meditation, quiescence, quietude meditation. tranquility meditation, stillness meditation. This is the result of what happens when we are able to focus our attention, when we can bring our attention together and place it in one spot. What happens when we do that, we actually have a transformation in consciousness. And some of you may have noticed that when you're practicing concentration, you might start to feel a little bit more relaxed. Yeah. Some of you may even notice a bit of calm. Perhaps, I'm not sure. That's a kind of a subtle, well, it's not a subtle, but it's a tangible alteration in consciousness. It might not be really profound, but it's something. So Samadhi helps to produce that. And Samadhi can also produce profound transformations in consciousness. So like mindfulness is really good. It gives you, mindfulness more develops an understanding or a perspective or a view on phenomena, experience. Samadhi transforms the way we are, the way we feel, the way we are, the way our consciousness is. So there's some quite profound changes that I hope to talk about a little bit later. And it is a tool for this process of meditation. There is a quote here, I'm going to find it. By Alan Wallace. The way we use Samadhi, or the function of Samadhi in this process, is to bring clarity, is to bring power to our attention, is to make our mind functional, serviceable. It's like, if we're driving a bomb car and it's breaking down all the time, it's not serviceable, but if we get it tuned up and trade it and get a new car, it's like we've worked on it, we've refined it, we've made it serviceable. It's actually functional. Samadhi is a tool to make the mind serviceable, to make it wieldy, to send it in different directions and to do things. I'm quoting Alan Wallace here, who's been one of my teachers. The primary purpose of developing shamatha, he calls it shamatha, is to apply the enhanced stability and vividness of attention to experiential inquiry into the nature of reality. It gives us the power to investigate. Mindfulness and insight is the investigation quality of it, but Samadhi gives us that power to penetrate and see into phenomena. It's like looking at the moon and exploring the moon, with our bare eyes, and we can't really explore. But if we get a telescope, like a powerful telescope, I think it's a Hubble, it's like we can see details of the moon. That's what Samadhi is. It's like that, getting a telescope for our mind. So I've noticed that Samadhi and the benefits of it have been used in contemporary psychology quite a bit. I was saying a significant but not so profound transformation is just becoming a little bit more relaxed and comfortable and calm. And we see, some of you may have heard of Benson, I think it's Herb Benson, and he wrote a book about the relaxation response in 1975. Any psychologists know about that book? Relaxation response. It was the opposite to the stress response. And he talked about the relaxation response as, being able to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous response, which is opposite to the sympathetic nervous response. The sympathetic nervous response is like fight and flight and kind of ready and up and all that sort of stuff. The parasympathetic nervous response is like the recharge, the respite, the rejuvenation, the come down, the calm aspect. And the way he described it was having 4 factors: a passive attitude that is not attached to goals, which is really important. Like to have an attitude that it's okay, not striving too much. Because, as we talked about in one of the questions last night, sometimes chasing after something, can make that object go further away. So a passive attitude, in other words, kind of being open. I'll just have a little story as an antidote to this. When I was interested in becoming a monk, I went and lived. I was still doing my art course, and I managed to do the last semester of it just by writing about my process, because I make this argument. Art was more about process rather than product. So I just wrote about meditation retreats, and I sent them into my supervisors. And I lived in Stanmore at Wapurangsi. There's a temple in Stanmore in Sydney, and it was they had an abbot of that temple, and Prat Mahasamai, and he was a lovely Laotian man, beautiful man from Laos, and sometimes he would give a talk about happiness, and he said, happiness is like a butterfly. You open your hand and it comes along, lands in your hand. As soon as you go like this, you lose it. And if you chase after the butterfly, you never catch it. So I think that's indicative of that passive, open attitude that one brings to meditation, or in this case, the relaxation response. The other thing that Benson talks about is an object to focus on, something to get your attention, to let your attention fall into and focus on. The other thing was a quiet space, and another thing was a comfortable posture. That's all pretty relevant, and they're similar to the instructions that we find in Serenity meditation throughout the sutras, and this is just one. These are the long discourses of the sutras. This book, there's a lot of sutras. Sutras, by the way, I'll just give you a brief outline of this. In the time of the Buddha, he travelled a lot and he taught a lot, and they didn't write the notes down, they didn't take notes of them, they didn't have tape recorders that could record what he was saying. But attendants or disciples used to remember what the Buddha was saying, and they would remember it almost like in verse, and they would pass it on to others as a chant. And sometimes the chants, well, not a chant, but in Pali, like chanting. That's the way they would remember it. Some of them were very long, and they had very good memories. And about 400 years after the Buddha passed into Parinibbana, they recorded them all. They wrote them down. They'd memorised them and they'd been passed down, and they'd been passed, because they were chants, they'd been passed down reasonably accurately. And they developed 3 baskets of, I can't remember what it was, but it was not paper, but some substance that was rolled up. And they had 3 baskets of them. One basket was the sutta basket. 3 big baskets, enormous things. And the sutta baskets are like discourses that the Buddha gave to various individuals. And he didn't sort of go about and say, I'm going to work out Buddhism. He just talked to people about their certain situation, about what was happening to them. He would prescribe meditations depending on their temperament and their situation. Not a one-size-fits-all. They didn't say to everyone, do mindfulness of breath. He just gave specific meditations for these specific individuals. So, in the sutras, there's a common phrase that says, go to a secluded place, at the root of a tree, or in a hut, or somewhere quiet. Make yourself comfortable. Focus your attention. That's it. And there's a lot of emphasis on having the right supports, having the environment that's conducive, like a peaceful environment. This is for serenity meditation. With insight meditation, it doesn't really matter. You can have jackhammers and have all sorts of things going on. Of course, there's no such thing as distraction in insight meditation, because everything becomes grist for the mill, so to speak. You can be mindful of everything. If there is a jackhammer outside your meditation hut, and you really don't like it, you can note aversion. So it's always possible to meditate wherever you are. But serenity is a little bit different. You make the environment conducive. You make yourself comfortable. You ensure that you're having the right diet and you're in the right climate. You're not in the middle of lots of mosquitoes or anything like that. So it's comfortable. So this is kind of pretty similar to the basic instructions. And the instructions go further. Put distractions aside. Make the intention that I'm just going to do this. And I'm not going to worry about yesterday's work or what I've got to do tomorrow. I'm just going to put it aside. You're not denying it, you're just putting it aside. You're making a choice to focus on just this. Just focus on this. Just this. And the more you focus on it, the more you have to put in effort to do it. You have to remember to come back, remember to come back, remember to come back. It sort of gains a sort of momentum. Gains a momentum. And you begin to become absorbed in the object that you're focusing on. So, actually I might as well talk about the jhana factors. Right now I'm sort of jumping ahead a little bit, but that's okay, because I thought I'd talk about how we find samadhi in contemporary psychology, and then finish up with the jhana the factors of jhana and really profound transformations. But I think it's probably timely to mention the factors of jhana. Now, jhana is a Pali term for a highly concentrated state. And there's a bit of difference in the way that people have interpreted what the Buddha was talking about with the jhanas. When I first learned about the jhanas, these highly concentrated states, I really felt like it was beyond my capability. It was just I couldn't do it. Because the way they were described was just like only real, saints and really enlightened beings could achieve jhanas, I thought. But since those early days, I've noticed that there's lots of different ways of interpreting the jhanas. You have it on like a spectrum with a really concentrated mystical states back down to kind of states that you can notice in life and you can cultivate. So there's a large variety, there's a large spectrum of the way different people interpret these jhanas. So technically there are 8 jhanas in Theravada Buddhism anyway. 4 material and 4 immaterial. What I mean by that is, immaterial means that it's just solely related to mind and mental phenomena. And there's no connection with tangible phenomena such as what we experience in our body. That's all. And the material jhanas are more connected with experiences in the body. So rupa jhana, arupa jhanas. That's the way they're described in Pali. There's a bit of difference in the way the factors of jhanas are understood as well. But there are 5 factors. The first factor is applying attention, basically. The next factor is sustained attention. The next factor is rapture or joy. The next factor is happiness, sukha, in Pali it's called sukha. And the next factor is, it says one, sometimes it's described as one-pointedness. I think it'd be more like becoming one or completely absorbed in something. If that makes sense. It's really useful to know these factors, because when you know them, you start to notice them, and then when you notice them, you can start to build on them and make them stronger. So there's a bit of difference in the way these factors are understood. I've read somewhere else that the first factor is vitika, the second factor is vichara. First factor, vitika, literally translates as thinking, like thinking about something, contemplating something. The second factor here translates as examining. So sometimes people would say there's, you're not thinking in the jhanas, but in this case there's some sort of thought that you're latching onto a thinking process and you're starting to really examine something, like really get into it. As a result of that, you have this experience of joy arise, a kind of a lightness, a bubbly experience that I mentioned yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yeah, I think it was. Piti. It's called piti. Anyway, so these factors of jhanas, once you start to know them and see them, it's really useful. Now, coming back to the factors of jhana from another perspective, it's been described as first striking a bell, like you strike the bell with the first factor, and then the ringing of the bell sustains, and then you have more movement from that, you have a joy arise. And I noticed some board riders the other day. I think somebody who's been riding a board. The way I think about it, that first part of it is like putting some application into something, and then you just get picked up by it. Like you know how when you paddle on a wave, with me anyway, I've got to really paddle hard, and I'm not very good at it. But paddle hard, and then you feel the wave pick you up, and then you don't have to paddle anymore, but you just kind of stay on and get balanced. I think it's something like that. It's like an initial application. You're kind of working hard, and then you're working hard, and then it starts to take you. You start to go along in the ride with it, and the trick is just to stay balanced in it. So this, I think, describes a little bit about how to cultivate jhanas, and I'll go into more details in a little bit, because I want to come back now to Western psychology and talk about how these states of concentration are used in Western psychology to great advantage. Is it boring? Yeah? Are you all interested? You're interested? That's good. That means that's one way people get concentrated. If you're interested in something, you'll start to get concentrated into it. If something is enjoyable, that's another way you get concentrated on it.
With the two languages and juxtaposition and introducing new Pali words, is it sometimes good when you use the Pali word just to help me concentrate? It's just reinforcing in English.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Which one was that? You know?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, vitika means the first factor in jhana. It means thinking. Vichara means examining. That's all. Piti means joy. But I'm saying them in English anyway. So okay. So knowing that knowing that there's certain factors that stimulate concentration, you can use that therapeutically. Like I used to see a lot of teenagers, young people, and I used to be an adolescent mental health worker, and they would come to me with all sorts of issues. Often I'd be talking about the four heart qualities and equanimity, to be honest, because a lot of their issues were relating to other people in the schoolyard or something like that. However, I did mention sometimes the word meditation. Well, maybe I didn't mention the word meditation. I talked about mental training, emotional training. And I would ask them, what do they get into? What brings them some enjoyment? What do they enjoy? And they would say, basketball, surfing, skateboarding, drawing, whatever. Sometimes they would say computer games. And I'd inquire about the computer games as well. If they were destructive in computer games, like war games about violence, I would kind of deviate their attention away from that. But if they were constructive games that were giving them some joy, I would say, okay, here's your instructions. For the moment, I'd like you to do more of that. Get into it. Get into it 100%. So engage in it. And often they would. And they'd come back and they said, it's really fun, it's really good, I really got into it. And I said, well, when you were getting into it, how were your worries and concerns, all this stuff? Oh, I didn't worry about it anymore. Let's put them aside. So this is an indication of what happens when we have a concentrated mind. And some of you may have heard of flow. Flow? My old mate, no. Not my old girlfriend, but flow, the psychological optimal state of being, described by Csikszentmihalyi, who's a famous research psychologist. Anyway, flow is an optimal state of being, and there's been quite a bit of research on this. They notice flow happens a lot with people who are artists, people who are musicians, people who are athletics or sports people, and it also, the people they studied actually included these individuals, as well as surgeons of all people. Because flow is something that happens when people get so focused on something that everything else falls away. It's an optimal state of being, and people talk about this as freedom from worry. They're present in the moment, they're just sort of in the flow, they're in the zone with it. They're just sort of getting into it. Does that make sense to you? Maybe, I think we experience flow when we do something we enjoy, when we get into it. I like to ride my bike and I can sort of get into it. It's really enjoyable. I do like to surf when I can do it. And I think surfers get in the flow. As long as what you're getting into isn't harming anybody, you could think about it as a concentration exercise. And it is really, really wonderful. It is really healthy. What I was talking about with the teenagers was helping them get into flow. And in fact, helping them cultivate concentration, because it's transformative. It enables us to put aside stuff, because we forget about it. We get absorbed into what we're doing. An analogy I often make is, well, not an analogy, an example, I suppose. Anybody been to a movie here? Some of you have heard me describe this before. People go to movies? Anyone go to movies? Okay. Movies. Sometimes you're running to the movie and you're running late. You're running after a day's work and you're going to meet your partner there or something like that. And you're this big long queue and hustling around trying to get the tickets to get in. Then there's people really noisy in the cinema and the movie starts and people are talking, you want to go, shh, pretty distracted. Eventually the movie starts and you're getting into it. You get into it more and more. It's really interesting. You get into it so much you identify with the heroine or the hero of the movie. I remember I was watching Gladiator. When I was watching Gladiator, I noticed that I was going, like I felt so absorbed in what he was doing. I felt like I was doing the movements. That's an example of absorption. You lose yourself in that. You become absorbed into that. Everything else falls away. That's what we're talking about with Serenity meditation. And there's many objects of Serenity meditation. In Buddhist practice, there's a book called The Path of Purification, which is about this thing. It was written about in the 9th century AD, I think. Anyway, it talks about the various types of meditations. There's lots of them, but generally there's 40 different types of formal, or 32 different types of formal serenity practice. So different objects you can focus on to become absorbed into. Some include like the elements, like fire, water, earth, air. And I went down to the beach this afternoon and I noticed a couple of people down there just kind of sitting, looking at the ocean. And a couple of people running, kind of connecting with the elements. That's an example of Samadhi on the earth element. For example, earth element with the ground, water element or movement, air element with looking at the ocean. Like there's another way I connect with air element, and I needed this when I was also got an infected foot in Bangkok one time. When I was a monk, we walked barefooted, and that's what you do as a monk. And one time I stood on a fishbone that was sticking out of the ground, just went right in there, into my foot, and it became septic. And I couldn't walk for about 6 weeks. Well, it just became terrible. So all I could do was sit in a little room in Bangkok, in a place called Wat Bor, which is close to Sukhumvit Road, which is where all the tourists are these days. But this is 1977 or something like that. And what brought me peace was to look out the window and see some little leaves fluttering in the wind. You know, when there was a bit of breeze, just these little leaves fluttering in the breeze. It would be so peaceful. I just look at that and I get really calm. These little leaves fluttering in the wind. That's air movement. Air. So this is just some examples of things we can choose to pay attention to. Other things we can pay attention to are reflections, like reflections on peace, freedom. In Buddhism, there's commonly reflections on the qualities of the Buddha. And the Dharma. Dharma means the truth of things, the nature of things. The Buddha is the awakened quality. Sometimes the Buddha in our own heart, the awakened quality in our own heart. Reflections on these things can bring a lot of peace, and we can get absorbed in those reflections. The 4 heart qualities are other formal serenity or samatha type meditation practices. Loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. We focus on these qualities, and so much so that we become absorbed and one with them. They become us, and we become them. Another quality, another formal samatha practice is mindfulness of breath. And we did some mindfulness of breath as a serenity practice yesterday. You can also do it as an inside practice, by the way. It's just a different focus of attention. With an inside practice, you're more focusing on how it changes. You're focusing on the experience or the seeing of impermanence, the seeing of not self, and the seeing of unreliability. And you're also focusing on how things are related. But as a serenity practice, it's just kind of absorbing into it. You're not thinking of it, you're not analysing it. You're just letting go and becoming one with it, and kind of getting into the flow with it. It's very calming. So, is it boring yet? Would you tell me anyway if it was boring? So maybe I'll talk about these profound changes that you can find. But basically, a message with this is that we may feel kind of tightened up and struggling with our practice. And if we can chill out a little bit. In fact, focusing our attention on something and cultivating serenity, for example, is the direct antidote to worry and agitation, as I was speaking about yesterday. Loving kindness and investigation is the direct antidote to ill will. And there's some other direct antidotes in terms of concentration and those factors of jhana that are directly related to the hindrances. But it goes like this. When you can put the hindrances aside, when they're aside, your mind is free to focus on wherever you send it, and then it gets stronger. So it's kind of ironic, because if you can put them aside just for a moment, then you can focus, then it strengthens your capacity to completely put aside the hindrances. I'll say it another way. When we do practice serenity meditation or shamatha, it enables us to put the hindrances at bay, to put them aside for a while. We don't uproot them, we just put them aside for a while, get a bit of space. It's like they're put in a cupboard for a bit, and we're free to just work with it, work with that meditation practice. It is insight that uproots the hindrances, by the way. Does that make sense? It's like insight and understanding is the way these hindrances are uprooted. But serenity enables us to put them aside for a bit. So, I've been practicing for a long time, and for many years it was a real struggle. It was just like pain, more pain. And I would apply insight to it, and I'd work through it. And then I started to discover what everyone else was saying about their meditation practices. Because you hear this. I remember in Melbourne, when I first got interested in meditation, go to Muktananda, which is a spiritual, not a cult necessarily, but a tradition, and or divine light, these different places, and they were doing a lot of samadhi practices, a lot of shamatha practices. They were coming out talking about bliss and how wonderful it was, and how they were having kundalini experiences, which is like this energy going up and down their spine, bliss and energy, and really transform. And here I was, practicing vipassana and just being really miserable. No, not being completely miserable, being peaceful, but kind of not so blissful. when we start to practice, when we can sort of get into a little bit of samadhi practice, it actually gives some respite from the difficulty. It actually makes us feel comfortable, at ease, relaxed. I started to realise maybe about 20 years ago that what everyone else was talking about with bliss and peace and all the rest of it started to become part of my life. And then I've been on a few retreats, and understanding these factors in the jhanas, I would be attentive to them. So I'd be attentive to them, so when I saw them arise, I would be very curious about them and endeavour to keep them happening or work on them. So one of the first things one notices when we practice is moments of pleasure or good feelings or kind of an uplifted feeling. Like it could be just a simple sensation of pleasantness somewhere in your body, like while your shoulders relax. You know how you get that nice feeling in your shoulders relaxing? If you focus on that, if you're doing mindfulness or breath, you start to feel a nice, pleasant experience in your shoulders. You let go of mindfulness or breath and you focus on the pleasantness. Your attention automatically goes into it because it's pleasant. It wants to focus on it. So the mind goes into it. And that's a way of strengthening what I was talking about yesterday as that joy. It's a joy, it's sort of a joy that starts to you feel it energetically, almost like uplifting and rising in your body. Sometimes it manifests as other things, but this is kind of lightness and a joy of being. Mind you, we have to do a lot of practice first. We have to really concentrate, really focus on just one thing. Put everything else aside. It's like you have no more time to think about what you're thinking about. You just focus on, say, the no stick or the state of mind. You're just really getting focused. You put a lot of energy into that. And then it's like paddling on the wave and it starts to pick up. Then you start to feel good inside, pleasant. And you nourish that by focusing on it. Then what you might notice is something else comes up. You might notice a kind of happiness, which is a bit more subtle than this uplifted joy. A happiness, a kind of simple happiness. I often feel it around my heart, and a lot of other people describe it like that. So joy, you feel it in your whole body, this kind of rapture, energy, really energetic. Happiness, it's more felt around the heart. And it's not as gross as the joy, it's more subtle. Then that transforms to a kind of more grounded contentment. So less around the heart, less kind of effervescent, and more grounded, but content, like really satisfied. Just a simple feeling of satisfaction, contentment. You want for nothing. Just lovely. And there's a bit of happiness there. And when you sit with that for a while, stay with that for a while, it can transform to a deep peacefulness of equanimity, which is a real still, clear quality. Just that. Just that. Obviously I'm going to pull out the sutras with the description of it. It's like you're not shaken around by pleasure or pain. It's not even overwhelmingly pleasant. It's just really, really peaceful and clear and still. No worries. Unshaken. Stable. Still. These are possible with the practice, and I describe them because by you hearing this, you can be more aware of it in your life. You can be more aware of it in your practice. And then you can nourish and nurture it. And I'm going to swing to something contemporary and something that I hope you can find useful. And it is an example of this and how it's used in contemporary psychology. And I know Rick Hansen, and he's a lovely guy. I've done a couple of workshops with him, a couple of trainings with him. Trained in something called Positive Neuroplasticity Training. It's a great course. I think he's got it online now. So I did that training with him, and there's a lot to it. But one thing he pointed out was an acronym of using the word HEAL, the letters in HEAL. So we have HEAL, HEAL. And he's describing HEAL as a way of breaking down or counteracting our negative bias. Some of you may know what negative bias is. It's an evolutionary. It was there from evolution so that we could survive. It's a tendency to see the worst possible things. It's a tendency to see danger. Like if we're 40,000 years ago, we're walking through the forest. Imagine here 40,000 years ago. And you're walking through the forest. It would be safer to mistake a coiled vine as a snake than it would be to mistake a snake as a coiled vine. Does that make sense? It's just a better, because if you mistake a coiled vine as a snake, and you walk up to it, nothing happens. It's just a coiled vine. But if you mistake a snake as a coiled vine, you're increasing your probability that you will be somehow harmed. Does it make sense? This is called negative bias. You have a negative bias. We tend to see the worst possible things. We tend to see how bad things are, how dangerous things are, how threatening things are, because it's biologically hardwired for us to do that. So we have to make effort to change it the other way, effort to change it to a positive bias. Because in the negative bias pattern, we miss out on so many positive possibilities. We forget to pay attention to the good things in life, our joy and our happiness and all the rest of it, so that we can cultivate it. We forget to do that. Rick Hansen talks about it as Velcro for the bad and Teflon for the good. So HEAL is about being tuned into the good so that it can be cultivated. HEAL stands for having an experience, like a positive experience. Could be like you walk down the beach, you look at the ocean, you go, wow, look at that. You go up in the headland and you see this amazing view and you go, wow, so beautiful, so beautiful. So you have this experience. And also you have it in your memory as well. E stands for enriching it, like looking at the nuances of it, looking at all the aspects about it that can make it richer for you. And when you do that, later on, when you want to remember it, you also do that. You enrich it with remembering the sensory modes of it, the sensory aspects of it, the smell of it, how it was relevant for you and all the rest of it. These things that increase our neural pathways, I suppose. So, that, what's that saying? Neurons that fire together, wire together. The more we we think and the more we respond to experiences in a positive way, the more that neural pathway will start developing in our brain. So this is enriching it. So H, having an experience, E, enriching it, A, absorbing in it, kind of getting into it, marinating in it. That's a Vikansan word, I love it. Marinating in it, sort of letting it saturate you, letting it fill you, so that you become it. That's what I was talking about with absorption. And then L stands for linking it. So it becomes healing because you link it, that experience, with a negative experience. Like a time, you may go up in the headland, have this awesome experience of looking at the view and feel so peaceful, so calm, so in tune with nature. So you enrich it and absorb in it. Then you may have another experience in your past or that's disturbing you, that's the opposite of that, like you're feeling really totally disconnected and frustrated and churned up and stressful. It's like that you're linking those two experiences together. It's almost like you're holding them in your mind at one time. But the positive experience just totally overwhelms it. The negative experience gets absorbed into the positive experience and disappears. So the negative experience becomes, the positive experience becomes the dominant experience. So you're shifting from a negative bias to a positive bias. Make sense? Okay. Can I read you? I can't read you a poem. I don't have any poems that relate to this, but I might read you something from the suttas. The way they describe being absorbed into this process. And there's some really beautiful descriptions here. I'll start with the first one. Okay. I think they used to make soap, in ancient India they used to make soap by putting all the chemicals together, all the ingredients together and then kind of kneading it so that it kind of formed a ball. So, just as a skilled bathman or his assistant, kneading the soap powder, which has sprinkled from water, forms in it, in a metal dish, a soft lump, so that the ball of soap powder becomes one oleaginous mass bound with oil, so that nothing escapes. So this monk or nun suffuses, drenches, fills, and irradiates his body so that no spot remains untouched. This is talking about becoming absorbed in this, like if you have joy in your body, let it fill you. And there's another one here. This is talking about happiness. Just as a lake fed by a spring, with no inflow from the east, west, north or south, where the rain god sends moderate showers from time to time, the water welling up from below mingles with the cool water, which suffuse, fill, irradiate that cool water, so that no part of the pool is untouched by it. So, with this delight and joy born of concentration, she no longer suffuses her body, so that no spot remains untouched. This sire is the fruit of more excellent and perfect concentration. There's a whole bunch of them. Just like the lotus root gets filled with water, so it's drenched with water, saturated with water. You know the lotus roots, how they're kind of got spaces, filled with water. Just like that, we allow our beings to be filled with joy, happiness, contentment, and deep peacefulness. So, I think that's enough.